Today in history, at 4 March 1918, a cook at Camp Funston in Kansas reported to the infirmary with a fever, sore throat, and headache. By midday, over 100 soldiers at the same base had reported similar symptoms. Within weeks, cases appeared at military bases across the United States. Within months, the illness was on every continent. The Spanish flu, a misnomer that stuck, killed more people in the 24 months that followed than the First World War killed in 4 years of fighting. The pandemic struck in 3 waves. The first wave in the spring of 1918 was severe but not exceptional by the standards of seasonal influenza. The second wave, which began in September 1918, was different in a way that epidemiologists still find remarkable. It killed with unusual speed, virulence, and with an unusual age distribution. Instead of claiming predominantly the elderly and very young, as influenza typically does, it killed adults in the 20-40 age range at disproportionate rates, precisely the age cohort that composed the armies fighting the war. The origin of the virus remains a matter of scientific debate. Camp Funston in Kansas is the earliest documented large outbreak, but cases have also been traced to France, China, and elsewhere. The name Spanish flu emerged because Spain, unlike the warring nations, had a free press that could report on the illness without censorship. When Spanish newspapers reported that King Alfonso Roman XIII had fallen ill, Spain was assumed to be the source. The warring nations, Britain, France, Germany, the United States, were suppressing news of the pandemic to avoid demoralizing their populations and giving comfort to the enemy. The wartime censorship had catastrophic consequences. Troops continued to be moved and deployed as if no pandemic were occurring. Crowded troopships carried infected soldiers across the Atlantic. Military training camps, precisely the environments where transmission was easiest, were kept operating at full capacity. In Philadelphia, a Liberty Loan parade in September 1918, attended by hundreds of thousands, contributed directly to one of the worst local outbreaks in the United States. The city's hospitals were overwhelmed within days. The second wave killed through a mechanism that was itself a consequence of the immune system's response. The virus provoked what physicians now call a cytokine storm, an excessive immune response that caused the lungs to fill with fluid. Healthy adults with strong immune responses were in some ways more vulnerable than those with weaker ones. The speed of death was unlike anything physicians had encountered. Some patients fell ill in the morning and were dead by evening. Heliograph operators transmitted messages about their own deaths. Doctors and nurses, working without the personal protective equipment that would be standard in a later century, died alongside their patients. The pandemic intersected with the final months of the war in ways that affected its outcome. The German Spring Offensive of 1918. The last major German attempt to win the war before American troops arrived in sufficient numbers was launched in March. The offensive made significant early gains. By the summer, the German army was weakened not only by Allied resistance, but by influenza, which spread through the trenches and rear areas without discrimination. German Supreme Commander Erich Ludendorff later attributed the failure of the offensive partly to epidemic disease. It is impossible to know with certainty how much the pandemic affected military outcomes, but the timing, the second wave arriving precisely as the Allied counteroffensive gathered force, suggests it was not negligible. The armistice came in November 1918, but the pandemic did not follow. The third wave struck in the winter of 1918-1919. It was less severe than the second, but still killed in large numbers. The Paris Peace Conference of 1919, at which the terms of the peace treaty were negotiated, took place as the pandemic was still active. President Woodrow Wilson, who had arrived in Paris as the most powerful man at the table, fell severely ill in April 1919. Some historians have argued that his sudden cognitive decline, observed by his own aides, affected his ability to resist the harsher terms imposed by Clemenceau and Lloyd George. The Treaty of Versailles that resulted has long been considered one of the seeds of the next war. The final death toll from the Spanish flu has been estimated at between 50 and 100 million people, perhaps 3 to 5% of the world's population at the time. The precise number remains uncertain because many countries, particularly in Asia and Africa, lacked the record-keeping infrastructure to count their dead accurately. The war, by comparison, killed approximately 20 million. The pandemic killed more people in a year than the bubonic plague killed in a century of ravaging medieval Europe. It vanished almost as quickly as it came. By 1919, the most severe strains had burned through the susceptible population. Survivors had acquired some immunity. A fourth wave was mild. Life resumed. The Spanish flu is the forgotten catastrophe of the 20th century, overshadowed by the war it accompanied. Absent from most war memorials, rarely taught alongside the battles that have defined the collective memory of the period. The soldiers who died in the trenches have monuments. The tens of millions who died coughing in their beds, military and civilian alike, largely do not. The pandemic left its traces in local death records, in medical journals, in the letters of survivors who lost everyone they knew in a matter of weeks, and in the genetic memory of the virus itself, which researchers found still circulating in the permafrost of Alaska, preserved in the lungs of soldiers buried in the tundra, waiting to be studied a century later.